let's get into it. What will make youth vote? Hi, I'm Aislinn with the McMaster OPIRG video team, and today we'll be exploring why students in the youth vote are in decline, especially as Canadian cities head into the municipal vote next year, October 2022. You've probably heard some of these alarming headlines in the news over the past few years, and nobody is 100% certain why.
So our project actually started out pretty broad. So we were just looking at voter trends in municipal elections. So understanding who is and who isn't voting.
That was a group of 6 CITYLAB students that found a whole bunch of correlations, including education and demographics, on why students weren't voting.
So to do that, we looked at past voter turnout rates and demographic data for each ward, and we tried to find correlations. So using those correlations, we kind of focused in on one group that we were interested in exploring more, and this group was youth.
All of these data, we saw a lot of the demographics, but one thing that was lacking was who was actually voting, and specifically it was 18 to 24 years, and hence that's what Sharon said. We wanted to hold a focus group to understand why and what are the barriers to voting, and we also wanted to get an institutional perspective from service providers. And hopefully from those data collections, we can actually gain a better understanding and help the city develop strategies.
So for me and my team, our primary responsibility is the elections process. And so that includes, ensuring the principles of the Municipal Elections Act are maintained. And, one of the very significant ones is that all voters and candidates are treated consistently and fairly in the process. So, for my purpose, any information that the City of Hamilton produces to the municipal election is readily available for all interested individuals, eligible electors. And so if a student, feels that their opinion is not heard and they'd like to express that through the ballot, I would encourage them to look out to the appropriate electoral body to be able to work through them for the 2022 municipal election. The other bit to this is that, municipal elections also see some of the lowest voter turnout in terms of the level of government. And so part of looking for barriers is trying to get to the why of why that is and see how we can kind of really emphasize the importance of municipal government in someone's lives in relation to the other levels of government.
Voting numbers are lowest in cities for sure. For example, the last 2018 election in Hamilton had just a 38.36% turnout, whereas the most recent 2018 Ontario provincial general election had a 57% average across the various ridings, and the most recent 2021 federal election was at 62%. Obviously, some of this has to do with the national spotlight the larger legislations get, but even federal voting trends are decreasing when you take a bird's eye view. With the data, you might find it difficult to see a clear pattern. Voting turnout has actually remained at a relatively consistent high level through Canada's history as a country when viewed as a proportion of registered voters. It's always jumped around the 60 to 75% as early back as Confederation in 1867. Then why all the alarm? Actually, all these headlines are concerned about this section right here, starting at the 1993 election. Before this, you can see how the voter turnout less than 70% is the anomaly. The rate would bounce back after a few elections, but looking at this section, the trend isn't stabilizing. These changes start to make sense when you look at the demographics of exactly who is voting, and more importantly, who's not. We know that the decline in turnout was due almost entirely to the failure of those reaching voting age in the last decade to vote in numbers comparable to earlier generations. One reason students in particular might not vote is because what political researcher Henry Milner calls the political dropout problem, where youth are disillusioned by voting, where it can seem like the system is broken and that their vote doesn't really matter, or even apathetic when none of the candidates look like them, or even speaking about issues they're facing as students. Students might not vote because they're away from university and they don't know enough about the candidates or city to know what the issues are and what opinion is right. But doing that research is part of what the process is, even for students.
A lot of friends who I met at McMaster who are not from Hamilton who are still here, and they've started their careers, and in some aspects they've started their families here. And so yes, maybe they came here thinking, I'm 18, why would I vote? I'm not going to be here forever. And now their life is here. And so naturally they would want to be engaged in the decisions that are made that affect their day-to-day. City council, they make decisions that are not in a vacuum, especially when you're talking about medium to large tier cities. To a certain extent, yes, you've got your townships and that, and everyone is kind of making decisions that impact people. But when you start talking about particularly GTA, a lot of those decisions impact, various relationships that are happening intergovernmentally. So what's happening provincially, what's happening federally. all of this is talking. So one decision that a council may make could inform, via correspondence, what other councils are looking at. And so I think it's not as siloed as people might think. And it's definitely an opportunity to, be plugged into some very interesting intergovernmental work if that's the approach they want to take.
What Connor and the city team are doing centers on accessibility issues, so much as it's easy to say, the problem is voting is too hard, that the lines take too long, that we don't know where the polling stations are, and we can't make it to it on that election day. There's just going to be some problems.
Community members who have experienced barriers have been very keen to share them, and we're very keen to listen. We do want to remove a barrier that someone may experience to voting, because who wants to have a barrier in place, right? If it is something we can remove, there are some limitations, in terms of like people have to have identification, or they have to have a declaration that they are who they say they are. And they, at this point, if they choose to vote in a poll location, they do have to wait in line for a little bit of time. So we can make that process easier versus something along the lines of having more seating available. So if someone doesn't have the ability to stand in a long line. So it is about kind of working within the process to find ways that we can make it as accessible and, I'll say the word friendly and inclusive. I think everyone should vote in any election. But ultimately voting is a choice, right? That's the beauty of our democracy. We can choose to participate in it, and we can choose not to.
Ultimately up to us to make that choice to vote. But recognizing that there are real barriers or perceived barriers to voting, the city's always looking for feedback on how to improve the voting process.
We talked a little bit about the language that is used often in these communications around voting at all levels of government, and it can seem a bit bureaucratic. We're using Engage Hamilton. We wanted to use Engage Hamilton because it creates that central repository. It creates a way for all of the information to come together into one spot. And so there's two opportunities there. There's the Engage Hamilton survey talking about barriers and accessibility of the election. And then there is the poll location criteria. And so that's a way for students or any eligible electors to suggest where there could be a poll location.
If you follow Canadian election politics, you might know that for decades people have been talking about how to increase voter engagement. One popular idea, especially for the youth vote, is making voting accessible online. Supporters wonder how we can deposit checks online in banks with just our phones, but we're still lining up for hours outside to tick a box at the polls. Voting processes that might revolutionize the elections process, such as online voting or changing the elections mechanism, isn't actually in the municipal's control.
So with the ranked balloting, the province said, no, that is not on the table for municipalities. So Hamilton similarly cannot pursue that option. To electronic voting, the city is actively looking at it as an option for 2026, just because it does involve a large amount of safety research, security research, and naturally, in the interest of ease of access, we want it to be a very good user experience. What we can do is kind of what you spoke about, is an increasing amount of communication and awareness. I do believe there's something very interesting about engaging voters early. We talk about engaging youth early in a number of services.
This is just the beginning of my conversation with Connor, where we found out how difficult and how much effort the city puts into making any kind of election changes.
I guess with the voting systems, what we do as a municipality is kind of dictated to us by the provincial government and the Municipal Elections Act. And so all of that takes some good time and research and effort. And then for 2022, we are going to have a mail-in ballot option. So if someone does not have an interest in standing in line at the poll, they can decide to cast in their mail-in ballot with no special circumstances, similar to what they did with the federal election that just passed. We look to use an alternative voting method like electronic voting. There will be a process where that is taken to City Council to approve the bylaw. And at that time, we would probably, I shouldn't say probably, we would do a level of consultation with people to understand various elements of it.
So structural changes to the election take time, and rightly so, because there are a lot of intersectional populations to consider. For example, implementing online voting you have to consider the digital divide. Some people don't have the devices to vote from their homes or don't even have homes, so public places for these votings would have to be figured out. But while these changes happen, students and all voters can do their best to ensure they're an informed voter.
We will have, the names of all the candidates and their respective wards that they're running in, or if they're mayoral, or if they're running for school board trustee, all that kind of stuff. Drawing the distinction between federal and municipal, it can be a bit difficult to have the same scale as the federal government, only because those candidates, unless they're running as an independent, have the kind of party platform behind them. And so, yes, you may know the candidate at the federal level as an individual, but ultimately, what you see is kind of what you get from the party platform, right? And so X party is kind of the same here as it might be here, with some minor differences in personality. The municipal election, candidates can have anything on their platform, really. And so it does become a difficult exercise, I think, for the voter. It might be difficult to kind of zone in on what the succinct messages are of their platform. Our local news probably does a very good job of that from elections that I've seen in the past. They do look at the candidates and kind of zone in on, what is your policy on this and this and this? And then have those conversations with your friends and neighbors. Did you hear about this candidate? Did you hear about, this platform? I'm interested in this. Why would you, have those kind of very democratic debates, really? That's the whole point of it. It's not just about voting. It's about understanding the process, the candidates, all of it together, again, is that holistic picture of what democracy is. That when the time comes, a great way for students or any community member to be involved is to work in a voting location. And by doing so, you're taking part in a very vital function of our democracy in a very meaningful way. So yes, have your say, vote. It's important should you choose to do so. But when the time comes, I would say, think about working in a voting location as well too, right? It's a great way to get experience, to perhaps meet other people from all walks of life. And again, to engage in a democracy in a way that is traditionally not thought of as engaging in democracy.
Studies have been going on for years on why students don't vote, but just by watching this video, you've already combated the biggest reason, the feeling that we don't know enough. Let me be honest, there will never be enough. Being an informed citizen is a lifetime commitment, but it matters. So I'll leave you with this, and hopefully next election that comes up, you'll be ready to vote and to share this video with your friends, because we all need to vote.